Can people who lost money in the Libor scandal get payback in court? I'm David Gillen for Business Day Live. We'll be joined by Ian Austin to talk about the troubles at Research in Motion, and Jeffrey Marcus will be joining us to talk about one of the world's most popular sports brands, Manchester United. But first, I'm joined by Nathaniel Popper to talk about the rate-fixing scandal involving some of the world's biggest banks. Good morning, Nathaniel.
Good morning.
So you're out on the front page today with the story, the Here Come the Lawyers story. It's become a political circus a bit on both sides of the Atlantic, but now Baltimore, other American cities and states are all piling in and saying, hey, this scandal has cost us some big money and we want some payback. What are the odds they're actually going to win here?
Sure. Well, as you pointed out, here's the moment where we remember that this interest rate, Libor, is determining the price of, literally millions of financial products around the world. And here are the folks coming forward and saying, we lost because the financial products that we had purchased from you were worth less. I think that there is a pretty wide recognition across the banking community that this is going to cost serious money.
Right. How serious are we talking here?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you had some in your report today. You had some figures
sure.
Back of the envelope stuff.
Analysts. Bank analysts. These aren't activists or even the lawyers. Bank analysts are easily putting the number into the billions or tens of billions in terms of what the banks may have to pay out. Now, it may not be in the context of these particular lawsuits that we're seeing right now, but in some way, the banks, in some sense, have already admitted to having done wrong here. So the chances that they're going to get out of this without paying are pretty slim. One
of the things, and we were just talking about this before the show began, that struck me as very, very interesting. These cases actually began before the Barclays bombshell and so on. So because this has really just added wind to the sails of suits they've been percolating for a while now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this really goes back now, I think, almost 4 years that there's been a slow discussion realizing that this rate, Libor, was vulnerable to manipulation. I mean, you have to remember, Libor is set by a pool of 16 banks. Anytime you have 16 players, that number of people could fit in a room. Anytime you have a group of people who could fit in a room setting a global rate, you have to imagine it's vulnerable to manipulation. And there's been this sort of growing body of evidence pointing to this, some of which led to the filing of these lawsuits. But as you say, this settlement between Barclays and the Department of Justice and the CFTC, they paid $500 million. This settlement just gave all the momentum to these cases.
Right now, some of the deals in question here, some of the deals that Baltimore and others say they lost big on, some of these things were like swaps, and a lot of people would say, look, you guys shouldn't have been doing this stuff to begin with, and now I'm playing the devil's advocate for the banks here. You guys shouldn't have been in this in the first place. You made your own decisions, and now you're trying to use this to wiggle out of deals that have cost you big.
Sure. Well, a lot of people, again, this is another story that goes back a ways. A lot of people have been very critical of the fact that cities got involved in these interest rate swaps. All of the big cities and all the big, really, state governments across the country are involved in these contracts known as interest rate swaps. And I think the criticism going back has really been that the banks sort of took advantage of the naivete of these governments to push these financial contracts on them. I think either way you look at that, whether you think they should or shouldn't be in these contracts, and I think the banks have taken a lot of the blame for them being in the contracts, either way you view that, now that they're in the contracts, the fact that Libor was, or was allegedly lower than it should have been, affects every single one of these contracts.
Right. Nathaniel, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So turning now to the world of technology, Research in Motion's downfall has been swift and steady. It took only a few years for the company that makes BlackBerry smartphones, to go from the industry leader to the market laggard. Ian Austin is Skyping in from Canada, where he's been reporting on RIM's annual shareholder meeting. Good morning, Ian.
Morning, David.
So look, I'm going to start with the really big question here, because RIM's meltdown has been absolutely spectacular. Who or what can actually revive RIM at this point?
Well, that's a very, very good question. It's now reached the point where a lot of people are thinking it's become a completely lost cause.
Yeah.
As everybody probably knows by now, they dismissed the iPhone as a toy when it first came out 5 years ago. They had similar sentiments about Android, and now they're desperately trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Their solution, a new phone, yet another touchpad phone. It was supposed to be out at the beginning of this year. Then it was supposed to be out at the end of this year. Now it's not coming out to 2013. The
Exactly.
question remains now, who's going to care at that point?
Exactly. The board this week now, they've been out there, they've been trying to calm shareholders who are obviously not happy given the way the stock price has collapsed. And it is really hard to imagine that things are going to turn around anytime soon. But you covered the AGM. I mean, what was the mood there? I mean, were people really angry, and was this like the pitchforks out, or what?
Well, in the true fashion of Canadian AGMs, it was pretty heavily stage managed.
Okay.
So only a relatively small number of shareholders got to ask questions. As is often the case, they use them in many cases to promote bizarre pet causes. The few who did have pertinent questions were very unhappy, but we're only restricted to one question, which does not make for a grueling interrogation.
Okay. Now, RIM CEO Thorsten Heinz, he says that the company is reviewing strategic options, which is sort of business speak for help. What kind of options are they reviewing? I noticed that the board is bringing on a guy who used to be a partner at Goldman and works for TPG, the big buyout shop. That sort of smells like a deal might be coming. Are people circling RIM? Is there any thought that this company might get bought?
Well, this is another question. It seems very, very unlikely. Google bought its handset maker through Motorola. There's been speculation on and off that Facebook might want to buy this, or Twitter. It's not very clear. Microsoft is sometimes touted as a buyer, but frankly, who wants the assets at this point? I mean, yesterday, the CEO was reduced to boasting about how they're number one now in Africa, and then later on admitted that they're number one in Africa because they're not making any money on those phones.
Oh my, okay. Ian, thanks very much. We'll be watching this one.
Thanks very much, David. Bye-bye.
And finally, we're moving on to sports. The English soccer team, that would be football team, Manchester United, filed for a public offering last week. And what might be surprising to some is that it wants to list on the New York Stock Exchange. Jeffrey Marcus, a contributor to our soccer blog Goal, and he's with me now, and we're going to talk about one of the world's most popular sports brands. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for coming in. So, just wind back the tape a bit here. When the family down in Palm Beach came in a few years ago and bought Manchester United, this would have been like a bunch of Brits with corgis coming in and buying the Yankees. Fans were outraged. But why now are they coming back and taking the company public again?
Well, the Glazers bought Manchester United with a leveraged buyout. They took on massive amounts of debt in order to buy the team,
and came in for a lot of criticism for that.
Absolutely,
right?
People were furious and are still furious with the team, and they think that by saddling the team with the debt in order to buy the team, they've decreased its ability to compete in a really competitive global game. Now, there's some evidence that they are in trouble, but if you take a look at it, the debt really hasn't affected the performance on the field yet.
This was a great point. We were actually discussing this yesterday, and they've done just fine, right? Even better than fine.
In the 7 years before the Glazers bought the team outright, they won 4 English Premier League titles, 1 European Championship, and 2 FA Cups. In the 7 years since the Glazers have bought the team and saddled it with this debt, they've won 4 Premier League titles, 1 European Championship, and have twice participated in the final of the UEFA Champions League.
Okay. Now, I'm curious what the British soccer press has been saying about this move to come to the New York Stock Exchange. They had actually been listed in London, and fans were big shareholders, I think.
Absolutely.
So is the soccer press? Our deal professor, Steve Davidoff at Dealbook, had a poster just out now talking about that. They may be coming to the U.S. in part because regulations are a bit looser here. But how's the soccer press in Britain reacting to all this?
Well, it's the conventional wisdom that the Glazers want to list in New York because they can have a dual-class stock structure, which basically means they can continue to control the team and still get cash. that's anathema to the city.
Sure.
And investors in London are not going to go for that. If they buy in, they want the same voting rights, and they're not going to get that because the Glazers don't want to give up control of the team because they may lose the team. As popular as Manchester United is among its fans, its owners are still hated. And the truth is that it's not very well liked in England. It's a much more popular team in Asia and the United States than in England.
It's remarkable. I mean, it has a huge global following. I mean, by its own count, it's nearly 700 million people. How they measure that, I'm not exactly sure. But business-wise, you were saying to me, the real money here in big soccer is really in TV rights and merchandising rights. Correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of money that they get from selling their domestic TV rights is huge. But the international TV rights are growing even faster, and especially when it comes to competition in Europe, the European Champions League. It's one of the most lucrative TV contracts out there. Manchester United has to be able to compete in that tournament and get that money to continue to compete. So the idea that they can buy the best players in the world, that they continue to keep the best players that they have on their team is so important, not just from competing on the field, but competing in the marketplace.
Jeff, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
That's all for today, but stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of these and other stories. I'm David Gillen for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.